Credit is as old as civilization. As far back as the book of Genesis, we read how Jacob mortgaged himself to secure a wife. A great economist defined credit by saying, credit is nothing but a permission to utilize money belonging to others. While credit is not money in the strict sense, in our complex business life of today it is often used in place of actual cash. Checks are an everyday example of the use of credit as a substitute for money. Farmers frequently use checks to pay for machinery, farm supplies, and other things they buy. Today, the merchant, the manufacturer, and the farmer all need credit. Only a few farmers become the sole possessors of their fruitful acres through inheritance. Usually, before a farmer can start as an independent operator, he must use credit to buy land for his crops or livestock. 150 years ago, farmers, woodsmen, pioneers, with the blood of adventure in their veins, were streaming westward, searching for free lands. From the neat little villages of New England, from the tobacco plantations of Maryland and Virginia, westward they pushed, ever westward. They hewed logs from the forest to raft their families down the Ohio, on to the Mississippi, and then across the Father of Waters. Free land. The call of free land sent the wagon trains west and north to the wilderness of Oregon and over the Sierras to fat lands of California. Finally, the last free lands in Indian Territory went to form the state of Oklahoma. No longer was free land to be had for the taking. Then, increasingly, farmers began to hear of mortgages. No longer did one or two children stay home to run the home place, and the rest go west to take up free land. Now the one who stayed must buy out the interest of brothers and sisters who went to the cities. No longer could an ambitious young farmhand or tenant take up free land in the West. If he wanted a farm, he had to save his money and borrow some more to buy a farm. That meant a mortgage. But where could these young farmers and tenants borrow? Some tried to borrow in the cities. But in the cities, industry was just entering the era of big business. Big business needed credit, big credit, and big business devised its own most convenient terms. The money was in the cities where industry was calling for credit. Lending money on a farm was risky business. Farms were far away, where the investors couldn't look them over every time they were a bit anxious. It was almost hopeless for the farmer to try to compete with industry for credit. Where a farmer did find an individual or local credit institution willing to lend on a farm mortgage, there was so much call for money that the average cost to farmers ran all the way from 5.5% to 7% a year in the most favored areas, and to as high as 10% or more in sparsely settled states. And even these farm mortgage loans were made for only 3 to 5 years. That meant the expense and worry of frequent renewals. Farmers, through their organizations and the rural press, asked for a credit system suited to the peculiar needs of agriculture. Finally, in 1912, Congress sent a commission to Europe to study the systems of rural credit which had been operating successfully in the Old World for more than 100 years. On its return, the commission submitted to Congress the draft of a proposed rural credit bill, modeled with adaptations to American conditions upon the German and Danish systems. Finally, on July 17, 1916, President Wilson signed the Federal Farm Loan Act, establishing 12 federal land banks. The act established a Federal Farm Loan Board of 5 members to be the central supervising body in Washington. The board selected 12 cities to be the homes of the 12 federal land banks. Each bank was given a definite territory in which to make loans to farmers through national farm loan associations. The territories varied from the single state of Texas in the Houston district to the 6 New England states, New York and New Jersey in the Springfield district. In deciding upon the states to assign to each bank, the board gave careful consideration to the types of agriculture in the territory, so that no bank would have to depend on the success of one crop. Thus, each bank was given maximum assurance that enough farmers could make their scheduled payments to enable the bank to meet interest charges on its bonds and have some money left on which to operate. Just 11 days after the Federal Land Bank of Wichita opened its doors in 1917, 12 farmers in the neighborhood of Larned, Kansas met at the home of John Harkness. He showed them the charter for the Pawnee County National Farm Loan Association, granted by the Federal Farm Loan Board in Washington. More than 2 decades have passed since those 12 farmers of Pawnee County, Kansas, received the charter for the first National Farm Loan Association. Today, local associations serve farmers from the northern tip of Maine to the southern tip of California. Approximately 900,000 farmers had borrowed more than $3 billion from the federal land banks since 1917. Under the plan of regular gradual repayments, farmers are making progress in reducing their debts. To follow the procession of those $3 billion that have gone out from the 12 federal land banks is to watch the mighty flow of credit stream through all the arteries of the nation's agricultural life, its basic industry. Millions of dollars have been borrowed by dairymen in the Northeast to buy farms or to refinance their debts. Farmers in all the tobacco sections of the country have felt the quickening touch of this credit stream. Thousands of cotton farmers annually save millions of dollars in interest because they are using federal land bank loans. Farmers in the Middle Western and Great Plains states have borrowed hundreds of millions of dollars from the federal land banks, dollars which have enabled them to buy farms, refinance debts, or save their farms from foreclosure in times of depression. But since this system of federal land banks and national farm loan associations was established in 1917 to provide farmers with long-term mortgage loans, other credit units have been established so that now there is a well-rounded credit system for agriculture which comes under the supervision of the Farm Credit Administration. The other units of this credit system include the Federal Intermediate Credit Banks, the Production Credit Associations, and the banks for cooperatives. Production Credit Associations make short-term loans to farmers and stockmen in every agricultural county in the country to finance all types of farm operations. They obtain the money to lend to farmers by discounting farmers' notes with the Federal Intermediate Credit Banks. The banks for cooperatives make both long and short-term loans to cooperative associations which market farm products, purchase farm supplies, or provide business services to farmers. This well-rounded credit system supplies credit geared to the needs of agriculture. But now let us narrow the picture and follow an episode in the lives of John and Mary Farmer. In Peace Valley, which may be anywhere that fruitful valleys lie, the life of the land has been running full and strong for more than 100 years. A pioneer family pushed through one of the passes in the chain of mountains which form the western boundary of the Atlantic Plain. Others went on, but Thomas Farmer decided Peace Valley should be a snug haven for himself and his children. The second generation of farmers swung their broad axes to push farther back the encroaching forest. Cattle browsed where once sturdy oaks grew in solid ranks. Still the land yielded rich harvests. The grandson of Thomas Farmer, the pioneer, bought more land. He built a house where his cabin had stood. Unwisely, his expenditures outran his resources. He heavily mortgaged his fruitful acres. Then came hard times and a fire that demolished his buildings. The sturdy acres passed into the hands of a creditor. For the first time in over 100 years, the Peace Valley farm came into the possession of a stranger. 4 generations of farmers made a living from this rich land. So do John Farmer and Mary, his wife. But John and Mary have to share that living with another, the owner of the Peace Valley farm. For now, John and Mary are tenants. A single driving ambition fills the hearts of John and Mary Farmer. The ambition to buy the farm their ancestors had hewn out of the forest generations before. Dollar by dollar, year by year, they have accumulated their savings. But their savings still fall far short of the price the owner has placed on the Peace Valley farm. But now John, like thousands of other farmers and tenants before him, goes to his National Farm Loan Association. There he talks with the Secretary-Treasurer of the association, who explains the terms of a land bank loan. He helps John make out an application for a loan from the Federal Land Bank. The next step in the procurement of John Farmer's mortgage loan is taken by the directors of the National Farm Loan Association. These farmers know John Farmer, his reputation as a worker, as a manager, and as a man of scrupulous integrity. They know the old farmer place as well, and its capacity to produce large yields of good crops. The application for a loan receives the committee's approval and goes on to the Federal Land Bank. When the application arrives, it receives the attention of men trained in the use of credit. From the records of many years, they know the value of farmland. They know the various types of soils and the yields they can produce. And they know the prices farmers usually receive for their crops and livestock. John Farmer's application comes to the desk of one of these credit men. He checks the location of the farm and assigns an appraiser who is thoroughly familiar with the territory. This appraiser, an employee of the federal government, goes to Peace Valley to examine the farm offered as security. Arrives, his trained eye takes in every detail. He notices everything in connection with the farm and its operation. Before he estimates its value, he looks over the whole farm. He appraises the buildings. He takes an inventory of the machinery. He inspects the livestock and estimates its value. And he is careful to notice the condition of the crops that are in the ground. The appraiser even uses a strange-looking instrument, a soil auger, to bring up samples of the subsoil. A painstaking fellow, this appraiser, but he has to be, for the loan committee of the Federal Land Bank must see the farmer place through his eyes. They must know whether a farmer can make a living from this farm and yet have enough left to pay the interest on his loan and gradually reduce the principal with small annual payments spread over a long period of years. The appraiser's report is favorable, and the loan committee of the Federal Land Bank approves the loan. But before the check arrives, let us answer your question: where does the Federal Land Bank get the money it loans to farmers? These mortgages which secure the loans are important in many ways. They are, in fact, a major part of the bank's assets. Just as the farmer borrows from the bank and gives a mortgage on his farm as security, so the bank in turn borrows from the investing public, putting up as security for their bonds thousands of these mortgages. Since most of its loans are for terms of 20 years or more, the Federal Land Bank agrees to repay most of its bonds in 20 years, so that by the time the bonds are due, it will have money enough from the yearly payments of farmers on the principal of their loans to redeem the bond issue. The rate of interest charged John Farmer is 1% higher than the interest rate the Federal Land Bank pays on its latest issue of bonds. That 1% on his and other loans is used to pay the cost of operating the Federal Land Banks. It is also used to meet losses through bad loans and build reserves against possible future losses. You see, the associations and the Federal Land Banks use the bonds to build a credit bridge between investors in the cities and farmers in the country who need to borrow their money. But now at the farm end of the bridge, we find John and Mary Farmer with a letter from the Federal Land Bank saying it will lend them the money to complete the purchase of the farm. This check is the fulfillment of their dreams. It seals the sale of the Peace Valley farm to the family whose ancestors hewed it out of the forest more than 100 years ago. It is now their land to have and to hold.